So now we'll do the 8-2 early challenges of foreign and international challenges for Washington. So let's get started here with 1793 in Europe and what the challenge is. And the answer is Britain and France go to war again. So that is what you should have down, and just have this little picture over here so you can sort of see the French flag and the British flag. And France and Britain had been at war numerous times, and again here towards the end of the 18th century they go to war again. And the reason why this is a challenge to the United States is that it divides Americans. Some Americans want to side with Britain and help them, and some want to side with our old ally France. And so basically you have a division among Americans, and that's why it's a challenge. When we talk about the leaders of the two emerging political factions, you have Jefferson and Hamilton and who they favored. Now, if we remember back into our discussions under the Untrodden Ground article and the way these men felt about the alliances, remember, Hamilton is the one that supports a British alliance because he feels we have more in common with them, and Jefferson and his Southerners tend to be more sympathetic to the French, being that they were our allies. And in some ways, you also have to understand, not only fighting a war together, France has actually had gone into revolution in 1789. The war breaks out in 1793, so imagine that the country is going through a revolution and then fights an age-old enemy. So the point here is that Washington has to decide between these two, and what he decides is that he wants to stay neutral. Now, that's a fine point, and we're going to watch two short clips here. This first one is going to be of a man by the name of Edmund Genet, and he's mentioned in your textbook, and his actions really complicate the issue. So let's watch the video and then we'll come back and talk about it. So in that scene, what you saw is Edmund Genet was guilty of going throughout the United States and trying to raise both funds and people to sign up to fight with them on British ships or on French ships against British vessels, which of course would have jeopardized our stance as trying to remain neutral. One more clip here I want you to see, and this will be a meeting between President Washington and his cabinet, and President Washington will see some problems develop between Hamilton and Jefferson, and then John Adams offers counsel. So there in the end you see Vice President Adams offering counsel to Washington, and then a little dig there about Washington's teeth, because that was a continual problem for him his whole life. Alright, so let's move down then to how that challenge was handled. And so the way it was handled was just as Adams had suggested and Washington wanted to do, which was a proclamation of neutrality. So here are the two parts that you should have. So if you need to pause the presentation, do so. So the first part is it prohibits Americans from fighting for either the French or the British on either side, and it also prohibits Britain and French from having any of their warships come into any American ports. Okay, so stop the presentation if you need to copy those down. The next event is 1794. This is going on actually on the high seas, most specifically the Atlantic Ocean. So these things you should have down is the idea of impressment. British Navy was a rough place, and what had happened is as they continued to fight their wars with France, they saw a high number of their sailors desert, go AWOL, they left. And so what they decided to do was kidnap thousands of American sailors, and they would stop these merchant ships and force them onto British ships. And so that angered and scared a lot of Americans, and we were not very powerful, but yet Great Britain's navy was. And so this is the second challenge that Washington faces in 1794. So if we go down and talk about this solution or how they handled it, this is when Washington sends John Jay, Chief Justice, to Great Britain to work out a treaty which bears his name. It's Jay's Treaty. In it, Britain agrees to leave forts. We had discussed that before, that they had been still occupying forts in parts of the Great Lakes region. But what was not clear is that it did not deal with the idea of impressment and did not deal with British interference in the area of the Caribbean. Those were two things that really angered a lot of Americans. And so, Jay's Treaty was a very unpopular treaty. In this short clip, what we're going to watch is this will be in the United States Senate, because remember, you have to understand your civics, a representative of the president can work out a treaty, but a treaty must be agreed by the legislative branch, and more specifically the Senate. And Vice President Adams is the president of the Senate, and if there is a tie, he gets to break that tie. That is the one power that the vice president has in the legislative branch. So in this video clip, you'll see that, and then you'll see Washington and Adams and the result of the negative attention and support against Jay's treaty in the second part of the video. Let's finish up with the last one. So this one is taking place in sometimes the same area of time as the previous one, but this one is on the Mississippi River, and some of us are saying, wait a second, you said this was foreign, this was international. But you have to remember, in 1795, the United States western border was the eastern edge of the Mississippi River. On the western side of the Mississippi River, that was a claim by the country of Spain. And so what they had done is they had closed the lower Mississippi to American access. So as we look, here's the Mississippi River as it flows right straight down through. And here you have the major tributaries coming in, flowing in the Missouri, the Ohio, the Arkansas. And so eventually they all lead down here. And once it got past the 31st parallel line of latitude, this was Spanish territory, so they closed it off. And so what had happened is when the Jay Treaty passed, that made Spain very concerned that there was a new cordial or nice relationship between the United States and Great Britain. And so they pushed to settle this dispute with a treaty. So let's move to that treaty. So we go down to the last one. How's that challenge going to be handled? What are the results? Well, Washington sends Thomas Pinckney, who was actually in Great Britain at the time, our ambassador there, and he sends him across the channel to Spain. And so Pinckney works out a treaty that bears his name. It's just called Pinckney's Treaty. And so I am going to hold you responsible for these three parts. So understand, it opens the Mississippi all the way down to New Orleans for the United States and gives Americans access to the port for storage and things like that. So if we look at this map right here, you can sort of see that 31st parallel. So now the Americans have access all the way down the Mississippi River to the city of New Orleans. It sits right there. Now, it also settles a dispute. If you remember in the one time we were doing our map where there was a little dotted line here between the two because this area was disputed, Spain decided to give that area to the United States. So if we look at a different one, you can sort of see it right here. So this 31st parallel line becomes the new border with Spanish Florida. So this area, as you sort of see, it says claim of Spain relinquished in 1795. Relinquished means to give to the United States. So that's the end of how Washington dealt with the various challenges in his administration.